She left the nursing home confirmation on the kitchen counter. I don't think she even realized. I read it, put it back in the exact same spot, and went to bed. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was on the phone with my real estate attorney. That is how I would like to begin, because that is precisely how it happened. No raised voices, no theatrical confrontation, no tearful moment at the kitchen island, where I pressed my palms against the cold granite and demanded explanations from people who had long since stopped considering my feelings relevant. That is not who I am. That has never been who I am. In 41 years of luxury hospitality management, I learned something that most people never do. The loudest person in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. I have always been quiet. I have always been deliberate. And on the morning I found that document, I became the most dangerous thing Courtney Mendez had ever unknowingly invited into her carefully curated life. A patient man with a plan. Let me set the scene, because the details matter. The kitchen of my Scottsdale estate faces east, which means that by 6:30 in the morning, the desert light comes through the floor-to-ceiling windows in long, amber ribbons that move slowly across the polished Calacatta marble floor. I had designed that kitchen myself, working with an interior architect I flew in from Chicago in 2009. The countertops are 3-inch thick, absolute black granite, imported from Karnataka, India, and they catch the morning light in a way that makes them appear almost liquid. The cabinetry is custom walnut, hand-finished with a matte lacquer that took 3 rounds of samples before I approved the color. Above the central island, 6 oversized pendant lights hang on adjustable brass rods, a detail sourced from a hotel lobby renovation I oversaw in Sedona in 2014. It is not a kitchen assembled from a showroom floor. It is a kitchen built deliberately, slowly, and expensively, by a man who understood what the word quality actually means when you strip away its marketing language and hold it to the light. I came downstairs at 6:42 that morning, as I do most mornings, intending to make a single cup of pour-over coffee using the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe beans I order monthly from a small roaster in Portland. I was wearing my robe, a heavy, ivory Turkish cotton robe kept from the opening gift bag of a property I once managed on the Kohala coast in Hawaii. The house was quiet. Leonard and Courtney rarely surfaced before 9, which was one of the few mercies of our arrangement. The Scottsdale morning was already warming outside, the desert exhaling its dry, mineral heat against the glass. The saguaros in the side yard standing like indifferent sentinels against a sky that had not yet decided between pink and blue. The document was on the far left corner of the kitchen island. A single sheet of paper, printed, folded once and then unfolded. The way you unfold something you have read more than once and then set down without thinking carefully about where you are setting it. It was face up. I noticed it the way I notice most things, without urgency, without alarm, with the particular quiet attention of a man who spent 4 decades catching every imperfect napkin fold and every out-of-place detail in rooms that hosted heads of state. I set my kettle to boil and picked it up. Saguaro Pines Memory Care and Assisted Living. The letterhead was a deep sage green with a small watercolor saguaro cactus in the upper right corner. The kind of visual branding designed to make institutional confinement feel pastoral. The document was a room reservation confirmation and intake processing form. Room 14B, a private room, the smallest category of private accommodation, at $4,800 per month, not including medication management fees, listed separately in a footnote, in a font size that required effort to read. The scheduled move-in date was printed in bold, 6 weeks from that Tuesday. Arrival window, 10 o'clock in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. Preferred contact for day of coordination, Courtney Mendez. Relationship to resident, daughter-in-law. At the bottom of the second paragraph, there was a sentence I read 3 times, standing perfectly still, with the kettle beginning to steam behind me. It indicated that a family representative had completed the preliminary cognitive assessment questionnaire on behalf of the incoming resident, citing the resident's documented periods of disorientation and difficulty with sequential tasks. The signature on that attestation line was not mine. It was a version of my name, Arthur R. Mendez, written in a handwriting I did not recognize. Someone had signed my name to a clinical document declaring me cognitively compromised. Someone had reserved me a room in a memory care facility. Someone had assigned me an arrival window, the way you schedule a furniture delivery, without consulting the furniture. I placed the document back exactly where I had found it, left corner, face up. I finished making my coffee and carried it to the window. Outside, beside the infinity pool, Courtney had been awake before me. She was crouched beside her professional ring light, a large LED unit she stored near the pool equipment shed, as though it were permanent household infrastructure, adjusting its angle against the morning sky with the focused precision of a cinematographer. She was wearing a coordinated linen set in a shade of sage green that I noticed, with a coldness that surprised even me, was nearly identical to the letterhead color of the document now resting on my counter. She had placed a ceramic mug on the edge of a teak lounger and was arranging a trailing white throw blanket with unhurried precision. Her phone sat on a secondary tripod, recording. She was, by her own later caption, shooting a slow morning reel. She had risen before sunrise to manufacture the appearance of effortless, unhurried luxury living, on my property, beside my pool, with my desert sunrise as her backdrop. I watched her for exactly as long as it took me to finish the last quiet inch of my morning coffee. Then I turned, rinsed the cup carefully, placed it face down on the drying rack as I have done every single morning for 40 years, and walked back upstairs to get dressed. I slept very well that night, deeply, soundly, and better than I had in quite some months. To understand how I arrived at that Tuesday morning, standing in my own kitchen reading a document that had effectively signed away my autonomy, you need to understand what that house was, what it cost me to build it, and what I foolishly allowed it to become. I spent 41 years in luxury hospitality management. I started as a front desk associate at a resort property outside of Tucson at the age of 22, earning wages that did not cover my rent without a second job, and I retired as the regional vice president of operations for a portfolio of 7 high-end resort properties across Arizona, New Mexico, and coastal California, overseeing an annual operating budget that exceeded $60 million. I did not inherit that trajectory. I built it the way you build anything that lasts, through an almost monastic attention to quality, an absolute intolerance for mediocrity, and the willingness to make decisions that were unpopular in the short term because they were correct in the long one. I was not universally loved in my career. I was, however, universally respected, which is the currency that actually holds its value. I purchased the land in North Scottsdale in 2001, when the market offered opportunity to those paying attention. The estate itself was completed in 2004, 7,400 square feet of single-level desert contemporary architecture, sitting on 2.5 acres of private, gated land with direct views of the McDowell Mountains to the northeast. I worked with the architect for 18 months before a single foundation was poured. Every material specification, every mechanical system, every landscaping decision was made deliberately and documented precisely. The infinity pool was positioned to reflect the mountain ridgeline at sunset. The primary suite faced west for that reason alone. The motor court was finished in decomposed granite, bordered by hand-laid flagstone. I had owned, over the years, 4 other properties. I sold all of them. This was the one I intended to die in, on my own schedule, in my own time, with my faculties entirely intact. Leonard is my only son. I want to be precise about how I describe what happened with Leonard, because precision is the only thing that keeps grief from becoming self-pity. Leonard is 52 years old, and he has spent the better part of his adult life in a sustained, low-grade pursuit of the kind of success that does not require him to do the things that success actually requires. He is not without intelligence. He has always been articulate, charming in the way that men who rely on charm tend to be charming, and genuinely capable of enthusiasm about new ideas. What Leonard has never fully developed is the capacity to sustain effort past the point where effort becomes uncomfortable. His 20s were spent in a succession of promising starts and graceful exits. His 30s produced 2 business ventures that I funded, both of which closed within 18 months. His 40s brought him to a technology startup, a platform I was told would, in Leonard's own breathless description, revolutionize how boutique hotels manage real-time inventory allocation. I listened to that pitch with the professional attention of a man who had managed boutique hotel inventory for decades, and I said very little, because saying what I actually thought would have ended the conversation and changed nothing. The startup failed 26 months after its founding, consuming $400,000 of capital, approximately half of which had come from me. Leonard called me on a Wednesday evening in October, 3 years ago, and explained the situation with the particular tone of a man who has already decided that the next sentence will be yes. He needed somewhere to stay, he said. Just temporarily, he said, just while he and Courtney regrouped, restructured, reassessed. 6 months at the most. I said yes because he is my son, and because 6 months seemed like a reasonable period of grace, and because I have never been the kind of father who closes a door that his child needs open. That was 36 months ago. Courtney arrived at the estate with Leonard and 7 large storage units worth of belongings, a ring light, 3 camera tripods of varying heights, a portable backdrop system, and the focused energy of a woman who had just been handed a significantly upgraded set. She had begun her Instagram account 2 years prior, documenting what she described as an aspirational lifestyle: cooking, interiors, wellness rituals, what she called intentional living, a phrase I have come to associate exclusively with people who have a great deal of time and very little accountability. She had 40,000 followers when she moved in, and 290,000 by the time I found the Saguaro Pines document. The growth, I understood later, was not incidental to the address. The address was the product. My kitchen became her kitchen on social media. The walnut cabinetry, the Calacatta marble, the brass pendant lights I had chosen with a Chicago architect, all of it recast as the backdrop of Courtney's curated domestic life. My garden appeared in her wellness content. My living room anchored her interior design posts, which attracted partnerships with candle companies, linen brands, and a skincare line whose products appeared arranged on my console table without my knowledge, and certainly without my permission. She tagged the location as home without a single qualifier. There was no mention that the home belonged to someone else. There was no acknowledgement that the estate she was monetizing was not hers. She developed, over time, a particular way of speaking to me in common spaces, the tone of someone managing a difficult housemate they do not intend to keep. She asked me, on multiple occasions, to avoid the main living areas between 10 in the morning and noon, because the light was best for filming then. She mentioned, once, that the smell of my morning coffee sometimes drifted into her content space when she was filming wellness videos, and that it was, in her word, distracting. She thanked me, with visible effort, when I stayed out of the kitchen long enough for her to complete a reel. She never offered $1 toward the mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes, the pool maintenance, the landscaping contract, or the housekeeper I employed 3 days a week. Neither did Leonard. I had become a quiet, tolerated guest in my own house. I had simply not yet decided what to do about it. I called my real estate attorney at 8 o'clock the following morning. Not 8:15. Not after breakfast. 8 o'clock. From my study on the east side of the house, with the door closed and the morning light coming through the plantation shutters in clean, even slats across the surface of my desk. My study is the one room in the estate that Courtney had never successfully colonized for content. It is book-lined, deliberately dark in its palette, and furnished with pieces that do not photograph well for aspirational lifestyle accounts. A worn, deep green leather club chair I bought at an estate sale in 1987, floor lamps with paper shades, a partner's desk I had refinished twice. It is a room that looks like someone actually lives and thinks in it, which made it, I suspected, aesthetically inconvenient for her purposes. I had worked with my attorney, a man named Douglas Firth, for nearly 2 decades. He had handled the purchase of the Scottsdale estate, 2 prior property transactions, and the revision of my estate documents 3 years ago. The revision, I now noted with quiet irony, that I had initiated precisely because I had begun thinking carefully about what a well-managed future looked like. Douglas is methodical, unhurried, and allergic to drama, which are the 3 qualities I require in any professional I retain. I told him I wanted to confirm the current title status of the property. Sole ownership, no encumbrances, no co-signatories. He confirmed all of it within 20 minutes, having pulled the records before I had finished my second cup of coffee. The estate was mine, cleanly and entirely. There were no legal complications, no shared deeds, no family trust arrangements that would require notification or consent from any other party before I could act. Leonard and Courtney had been living in the house for 3 years and held precisely zero legal interest in it. They were guests. They had always been guests. They had simply, over time, forgotten that particular detail. I then asked Douglas for the name of the most discreet boutique real estate firm operating in the North Scottsdale market. I was specific about what I meant by discreet. I did not want a firm that advertised on billboards along the Pima corridor. I did not want yard signs, open houses, or any listing that would appear on public aggregator platforms where Courtney's network of 290,000 followers might stumble across it. I did not want a lockbox on my front door or a photographer's van in my motor court on a Saturday morning. I wanted a firm that operated in the off-market space, the quiet, private, institutional layer of high-value real estate transactions, where serious buyers and sellers conduct business without the theater of public listings. Douglas gave me 2 names. I called the first one that afternoon. The firm was called Meridian Private Realty, and the agent I was connected to was a woman named Sandra Villanueva, who came to the house 3 days later on a Tuesday morning, arriving, as I had requested, at 7:45, before either Leonard or Courtney was awake. She walked the property with the practiced, unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time and had no patience for sentiment. She did not exclaim over the kitchen. She did not compliment the infinity pool. She assessed the square footage, the lot dimensions, the McDowell Mountain sightlines, the quality of the mechanical systems, the age and condition of the roof, and the comparable sales data for off-market estates in the immediate corridor. And then she sat across from me at the kitchen island, the same island where the Saguaro Pines document had rested 4 days prior, and she told me what she believed the property would command from the right private buyer. Her number was $4.4 million. I told her I would not accept less than 4.6. She studied me for a moment with the particular expression of a professional who has just recalibrated their assessment of who they are dealing with, and then she nodded and said she would begin making discreet inquiries within her buyer network immediately. We agreed on a 3% commission structure, a strict confidentiality protocol, and the absolute requirement that no documentation bearing the property address would be distributed through any channel that could be indexed, photographed, or shared digitally without my explicit written approval. She left before 8:30. Courtney came downstairs at 9:12 and filmed a slow-pour matcha latte video in my kitchen, entirely unaware that the kitchen had been professionally appraised for sale 40 minutes prior. What followed was a study in the particular satisfaction of watching a process move efficiently when it has been set in motion by people who know what they are doing. Sandra Villanueva worked her buyer network with the quiet intensity of someone who understood that off-market transactions at this price point lived or died on the speed and discretion of the first contact. On the 9th day after our initial meeting, she called me at 7:50 in the morning. She had a buyer, a private individual, she said, relocating from the Pacific Northwest, purchasing in cash, with a transaction history that indicated both the means and the temperament to close without complications. The offer was $4.7 million. I asked her to repeat it, not because I had not heard it clearly, but because I wanted a brief moment to acknowledge, privately, the extraordinary distance between $4.7 million and the $4,800 monthly room that someone had reserved for me at Saguaro Pines. I accepted the offer that afternoon. The purchase agreement was drawn with a 30-day closing period, a term I had specifically requested for reasons that had nothing to do with the property transaction itself and everything to do with the calendar. 30 days from the signing date landed, with a precision I found almost architectural, on the exact week that Courtney had scheduled my arrival at the memory care facility. I signed the agreement at Douglas Firth's office, alone, on a Thursday morning. I drove home, changed my shoes, and sat quietly in the garden for an hour, watching a pair of cactus wrens argue noisily over territory in the old mesquite tree near the south wall. The desert, as always, was entirely indifferent to the scale of what had just quietly happened. I found that deeply appropriate. There is a particular kind of theater that begins when someone has decided what they are going to do with you, but has not yet done it. I had seen versions of it before, in my professional life. The employee who has already accepted another offer and begins subtly distancing themselves. The vendor who has already decided to terminate a contract and starts seeding the paperwork. It has a texture to it, a slight but unmistakable shift in register, like a room where the air pressure has changed without anyone opening a window. I recognized it the morning after I found the Saguaro Pines document, and I watched it unfold over the following 2 weeks, with the detached, clinical attention of a man who already knew exactly how the story ended. Courtney began with memory. It was, in retrospect, almost logical. She had, after all, signed a document citing my periods of disorientation and difficulty with sequential tasks, and she needed that narrative to feel coherent, perhaps even to herself. It started small. A comment at breakfast, delivered in a voice that had been carefully tuned to land somewhere between concern and observation, noting that I had left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter again. I had not left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter. I had placed them there deliberately while I reached for the sugar, and I retrieved them 40 seconds later. But the comment was not about the glasses. The comment was about establishing a pattern in the presence of Leonard, who was standing at the refrigerator, and who said nothing, but also did not contradict her. 2 days later, she mentioned, in a group text that included Leonard and myself, that she had found my car keys on the front entry table and wanted to make sure I knew where they were, just in case. My car keys were on the front entry table because that is where I keep my car keys, in a shallow dish I have used for precisely that purpose for 11 years. 3 days after that, she suggested, over dinner, gently and with what I can only describe as performed reluctance, that it might be worth my while to speak to my physician about some of the changes she had been observing. Leonard nodded, with the slow, heavy solemnity of a man rehearsing a role he had been coached through. I said I would think about it. I looked at neither of them when I said it. I cut my steak, changed the subject, and spent the rest of the evening quietly in my study, reading, entirely undisturbed by what had just transpired across the dinner table. Because while Courtney was carefully constructing the narrative of my decline over evening meals and group texts, I was doing the following. I was on the phone with a real estate agent in Coronado, California, a barrier island city just across the bridge from San Diego, where I had once spent a long weekend at the Hotel del Coronado in 1998, and made a private note that if I ever left the desert, this was where I would go. The listing I had found was a 2-bedroom oceanfront condominium on the 4th floor of a 12-unit building on Ocean Boulevard, 2,100 square feet, floor-to-ceiling glass, facing the Pacific, a kitchen that had been recently renovated with Carrara marble and matte white cabinetry, a private terrace with an unobstructed view of the water. The asking price was $2.2 million. I offered $2.1 in cash, with a closing timeline coordinated precisely to align with the Scottsdale sale. The seller accepted within 48 hours. I arranged for the coordination between the two closings through Douglas Firth's office, using a bridge structure that ensured I would have the Coronado keys in hand within 72 hours of the Scottsdale transfer. I did not discuss these arrangements with Leonard. I did not mention Coronado to Courtney. I began the process of quietly identifying which of my possessions I intended to take and which I intended to sell or donate, making these assessments with the systematic thoroughness of a man organizing a significant operational transition, which is precisely what it was. I labeled nothing. I moved nothing prematurely. I conducted all of this within the ordinary rhythms of my daily life, in the early morning hours when the house was still silent, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook I kept in the drawer of my study desk. Meanwhile, Courtney posted 4 times that week on Instagram. On Monday, a morning light series shot in my kitchen, the walnut cabinetry, the brass pendants, a bowl of figs on the absolute black granite, captioned with a reflection on the peace of building a life that feels like home. On Wednesday, a reel filmed at the infinity pool at dusk, the McDowell Mountains purple and gold behind her, set to an ambient music track with the caption, "Grateful for stillness." On Friday, a carousel of interior details, my console table, the living room's custom concrete fireplace, the entry hall's flagstone floor, under the heading, "A Home That Holds You." On Sunday, a flat lay of a weekend brunch spread she had assembled on my dining table, with the caption, "Slow Sundays are a form of self-respect." I read every one of them, not out of resentment, not out of any appetite for outrage, but with the quiet, observational patience of a man watching a clock. Each post was a timestamp. Each caption was an artifact. Each reel filmed in my kitchen, beside my pool, in front of my mountain view, was a document of something she did not yet know she was losing. The house was under contract. The closing date was locked. The Coronado Keys were 3.5 weeks away. And Courtney Mendez, with her ring light and her sage linen sets and her 290,000 followers, was manufacturing content about the peace of building a life that feels like home, in a home that had already been legally sold to someone else. There is a phrase I used frequently in my hospitality career when a property transition was underway but not yet announced. We called it the quiet period. Everything looks normal from the outside. Guests check in, meals are served, the pool is heated, the staff smiles, the music plays. And underneath all of it, ownership has already changed hands. That was precisely and satisfyingly where we were. I chose a Sunday evening, not because Sunday carried any particular symbolic weight, but because it was the end of a content cycle for Courtney. She had finished posting her slow Sunday brunch spread that afternoon. The engagement numbers were settling, and she was in the particular mood of mild self-satisfaction that follows a well-performing post. Leonard had spent most of the day on his laptop at the kitchen table, nursing what I gathered was either a nascent business concept or a long afternoon of doing very little with considerable visual effort. The house was warm and quiet, in the way desert houses are on October evenings, when the heat has finally eased its grip, and the windows can be opened to the smell of cooling creosote and dry stone. I asked them both to come to the kitchen island when they had a moment. Not urgently, not with any particular gravity in my voice. Simply an ask. The way you might ask someone to come look at a sunset or locate a misplaced item. I was already seated on one of the counter stools when they drifted in. Courtney with her phone in her hand as always. Leonard with the slightly defensive posture of a man who has learned that being called to a conversation often precedes being asked to do something he does not want to do. I had chosen that specific location, the kitchen island, with complete and deliberate awareness of what it meant to me, if to no one else in that room. This was the surface on which the Saguaro Pines document had rested. This was where the plan had begun. I wanted to close the loop in the same room where it had opened. That is perhaps a small, private indulgence, the kind of detail that only matters to the person who knows about it, but it mattered to me, and I permitted myself the satisfaction of it. I told them, in the same measured tone I had once used to inform a resort management team that their property was being rebranded and half the senior staff positions were being restructured, that I had something to share regarding the house. I told them I had accepted an offer from a private buyer. I told them the sale was already under contract, that the closing date was in 30 days, and that the terms of the sale required the property to be fully vacated by the date of transfer. I said all of this without preamble, without apology, and without raising my voice above the conversational register I use for any matter of logistical information. I then set my water glass down, folded my hands on the counter, and waited. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 full seconds. It felt considerably longer. Leonard spoke first, which surprised me. I had expected Courtney to move faster, but Leonard had clearly been living with some version of guilt that needed an immediate outlet. He said the word "dad" in a tone that attempted to compress approximately 30 years of complicated dynamic into a single syllable. Then he said he did not understand, that this was the family home, that surely I could have discussed this with them, that there were other options, that they had nowhere to go, that 3 years was not, and here he paused, as though searching for the word, which told me the sentence had not been prepared. that 3 years was not enough time to simply be removed. He said removed, as though he were the resident, as though the 36 months of free occupancy had converted, in his mind, to some form of tenure. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I told him, gently but without any flexibility in my tone, that the decision had been made, that the title was solely mine, and that 30 days was a legally generous notice period, which it was. I told him I was confident they would find something suitable, and that I was happy to provide a reference letter to any prospective landlord who requested one. I said this last part without irony, which I think was the correct choice. Courtney had gone quiet in a way that told me she was not processing grief. She was processing arithmetic. I watched it happen in real time, the particular focused stillness of someone running numbers behind their eyes, the 30-day move-out date, the 6-week timeline she had arranged at Saguaro Pines, the gap between those two figures, the realization that her carefully sequenced plan had been outrun, in the wrong direction, by an event she had not anticipated from a man she had decided was no longer capable of sequential thinking. I could see the moment she understood. Her face did not collapse. She was too composed for that. But something behind her eyes shifted, a door closing, a light going off, and for just a moment, before she reassembled herself, she looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. It was not anger, it was something closer to recalibration. She asked, with admirable evenness, where I planned to go. I told her I had arranged for a condo in California and that the details were in hand. She asked if I was sure about this. I told her I was entirely sure, that I had been certain for some time, and that the paperwork was complete. She nodded once, slowly, the way you nod when you are deciding whether to pursue a line of inquiry and conclude that the information it would yield is no longer actionable. Leonard made one final attempt. He said he wished I had talked to them first. He said he felt ambushed. He said he thought they were family. I told him that they were family, that nothing about that had changed, and that family did not alter the fact of property ownership or the terms of a signed purchase agreement. I told him I loved him, and that I hoped 30 days was sufficient time to make a comfortable transition. Then I stood up, pushed my stool in, and said goodnight. I walked back to my study alone. The desert outside was dark and enormous, and completely silent, as it always is at that hour. I sat down in my green leather chair, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt finished. There is a meaningful difference between those two things, and it matters enormously. The 30 days that followed had the quality of a controlled demolition, the kind where the structure comes down precisely as planned, in exactly the sequence that was designed, and the people watching from the street cannot quite believe how clean it looks from the outside until they see what is left where the building used to stand. I had arranged for a professional moving company out of Phoenix, a firm I had used twice before, the kind that sends a crew chief for a pre-move assessment and arrives on moving day with numbered boxes, color-coded room tags, and the quiet, systematic efficiency of people who do not need to be told how to handle a Venetian glass lamp or a set of first edition books. They came on a Wednesday, the 28th day after the Sunday kitchen conversation, 2 days before the scheduled closing. There were 4 men and a crew chief named Marcus, a compact and serious person who had walked the house with me room by room on the assessment day 3 weeks earlier and asked precise, technical questions about fragility ratings, insurance valuation thresholds, and delivery sequence in Coronado. He did not remark on the size of the house or the quality of its contents. He simply cataloged and planned, which is the professional behavior I have always found most reassuring. I was taking less than I might have expected. The things I chose were specific and personal. The green leather club chair from my study, the partner's desk, the collection of architectural books I had been assembling since the late 1980s, the framed survey maps of the 4 properties I had managed during my peak career years, the Turkish cotton robe, a small oil painting of the Kohala coast that I had purchased from a local artist during a site visit in 2003 and had hung in every home I had owned since, the furniture I left behind, the custom dining table, the sectional sofa in the living room, the bedroom sets in the guest suites, had been sold with the house as part of the purchase agreement, a detail Sandra Villanueva had negotiated that added a further $40,000 to the final price. The buyer had wanted the estate furnished. I had been happy to oblige. There is a particular freedom in leaving behind the things that were always more about the space than about you. Leonard and Courtney's moving preparations, by contrast, had the frantic, improvised energy of people who had not genuinely believed, until the last possible moment, that the ground was actually shifting beneath them. I am not entirely certain when they found the apartment, but I know it was late. I overheard a phone conversation Leonard was having in the hallway approximately 10 days after the kitchen meeting, in which he was explaining to someone on the other end, with mounting desperation, that they needed something available within 3 weeks, that yes, they had a dog, and that the budget was, and here his voice dropped to a register that told me the number was considerably lower than whatever the person on the other end was about to quote him. They found a 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe, ultimately, a detail I learned from a mention Courtney made while carrying boxes through the entry hall. Tempe. From a 7,400 square foot private estate on 2.5 gated acres in North Scottsdale to a 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe. I said nothing about this. It was not my place to comment. Courtney spent the final week of the 30 days in a state I can only describe as controlled distress, with a content strategy running underneath it. She filmed her final reels in the house with the focused urgency of someone harvesting a crop before a frost. The kitchen, the pool, the mountain view, the entry hall, the garden. She moved through each space with her phone and her ring light, as though she were archiving something irreplaceable, which, from her perspective, she was. She posted every day that final week. I saw, from a brief and purposeful glance at her account, that the captions had shifted in register. Less gratitude for stillness, more vague language about transitions and chapters, and the beautiful uncertainty of what comes next. Her followers, who had been sold the premise of an established, rooted luxury life, were beginning to sense something. Engagement on the final 3 posts was measurably lower. I noted this without pleasure and without surprise. The morning the movers loaded the last of my boxes, I walked through the estate one final time. Alone, in the early morning, before Marcus and his crew arrived, before Leonard emerged from the primary suite they had quietly occupied as their own. I moved through each room slowly and without hurry, not with grief exactly, but with the careful attentiveness of a closing inspection, the way you walk a hotel property at the very end of a management tenure and catalog what you built and what you learned and what, if anything, you would do differently given the chance. The kitchen still caught the morning light the way Patricia Osei had designed it to catch it. The infinity pool held the mountain reflection as precisely as it had on the day the contractor first filled it. The saguaros in the side yard were, as always, entirely indifferent. I flew to San Diego that afternoon. The condo keys had been transferred to Douglas Firth's Coronado associate 48 hours prior. A car met me at the airport. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was standing on my private terrace on Ocean Boulevard, with the Pacific laid out before me in the long, horizontal light of a California evening, silver and copper, and an impossible deep blue at the horizon line. The air was cool and salt-weighted, and entirely different from any air I had breathed in the Sonoran Desert in 23 years of living in it. Below me, the waves moved against the seawall with the patient, rhythmic indifference of something that has been doing the same thing for a very long time and intends to continue long after every human complication has resolved itself. I poured a glass of Barossa Shiraz I had packed deliberately in my carry-on bag and sat down in a rented chair. My own furniture was arriving Thursday, and I watched the sun go down over the water. It took approximately 22 minutes from horizon touch to dark. I did not film it. The scheduled move-in date at Saguaro Pines Memory Care and Assisted Living arrived on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks to the day from the Tuesday I had stood at my kitchen counter reading the confirmation form in the amber light of a Scottsdale dawn. I know this because I had noted the date in the same small leather-bound notebook where I had tracked the Coronado closing details and the moving company's delivery schedule. I noted it, without drama, in the same handwriting I use for grocery lists and appointment reminders, because drama was not the appropriate register for the occasion. The occasion called for nothing more than a quiet acknowledgement that something had been scheduled, and had not occurred, and would not occur, and that the room at Saguaro Pines, room 14B, $4,800 per month, private, smallest category, was sitting empty on that Thursday morning, while I was sitting on my Coronado terrace, with a cup of Yirgachev coffee, watching brown pelicans move in a low, purposeful formation above the surface of the Pacific. The intake coordinator at Saguaro Pines would have called Courtney that morning, the preferred contact for day of coordination. There would have been questions about arrival windows and documentation. I do not know what Courtney told her. I do not need to know. The room went unfilled, the reservation eventually expired, and Arthur R. Mendez was never checked into memory care, because Arthur R. Mendez was on a barrier island in California, reading the newspaper at a table that faced the sea. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters to the integrity of what I am describing. I never confronted Courtney with the document. I never mentioned the Saguaro Pines email in any conversation, with her or with Leonard, before the sale, during the 30 days, or in any communication after. Not because I lacked the opportunity. Not because I was afraid of the conversation, but because the act of confronting someone with what you know transforms the situation into an argument, and arguments are negotiations, and I had no interest in negotiating. The moment I picked up that printed form from my kitchen counter and set it back in the exact position I had found it, the conversation was over. What followed was not a confrontation. It was simply an execution of the decision I had already made. There is no satisfaction in explaining a move to the person you have just made it against. The satisfaction, if you can even call it that, lives entirely in the silence. What I watched from a careful distance over the 60 days that followed was the systematic collapse of something that had never had a foundation solid enough to hold the weight placed on it. Courtney's Instagram account, which had been built on the architecture of my estate, its rooms, its light, its proportions, its carefully curated physical identity, did not survive the transition to a 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe. This is not speculation. I checked her account twice, on the 30th day after the move and on the 60th, and the numbers told a story that required no interpretation. The kitchen content dried up first. A Tempe apartment kitchen, however styled, cannot replicate the specific quality of absolute black granite under custom walnut cabinetry in a North Scottsdale estate. Her attempts to reframe the aesthetic, leaning into what her captions called a season of simplicity, a new chapter, an intentional reset, were received by her audience with the measurable indifference of people who had subscribed to one product and were being offered a different one without adequate explanation. Within 30 days of the move, engagement had dropped by approximately 22%. Within 60 days, the drop was closer to 40%. 2 of her brand partnerships sent termination notices, including the skincare line whose products had once been arranged on my console table. 1 linen company quietly unfollowed her account. I noted all of this with the detachment of someone reading an analyst's report on a sector they no longer hold a position in. It was not personal. It was structural. The brand had always been borrowed architecture, and when the architecture was returned to its owner and sold, what remained was only Courtney in an ordinary space, without the infrastructure that had made the performance possible. That is not a tragedy. That is a consequence, and consequences are entirely logical. Leonard, as far as I can determine from the occasional brief and careful text exchange that has resumed between us, is exploring another business concept. I have not asked for details. I have not offered funding. I express interest in his well-being, as a father does, and keep those exchanges at a warmth that is genuine but not extensive. I do not yet know what our relationship will look like from this distance, both geographic and otherwise. I know what I hope it becomes. I am patient enough to allow it the time it needs without forcing a resolution that neither of us has yet earned. The document itself, the Saguaro Pines Room Reservation Confirmation and Intake Processing Form, Room 14B, $4,800 per month, arrival window 10 to 2, family representative signature, that was not mine, I kept. I placed it in the leather-bound notebook, folded once, between the pages that track the Coronado closing and the moving company's final receipt. It is not a trophy. I want to be precise about that. I do not keep it out of bitterness, and I do not take it out to read it again. I keep it because it is a document. It records a fact. It records that someone looked at a 70-year-old man who had built a career and an estate and a life through 4 decades of disciplined, attentive, considered effort, and decided he was a problem to be managed, an inconvenience to be relocated, a tenant to be removed from a property he owned so that a ring light and a sage linen set could have the space unobstructed. What they had not accounted for, what I suspect they were genuinely incapable of accounting for, was that the man they had decided was losing his sequential thinking had already, quietly, sequenced everything. I folded the notebook closed. The ocean was very bright and still that morning. The pelicans were back. I made a second cup of coffee, left the door open to let the Pacific air move through the room, and that was the end of it.